All right, I think we'll get started now. Um, we are talking today about generative AI and the potential it holds to ignite, transform, and accelerate learning and development in your organizations. So, I know unless you have been in a cave, you would have heard of generative AI. You would have heard about Chat GPT, and you must be wondering, that while all this excitement and buzz is around you, what are the things that you can do to transform learning and development and human resources and organization capability building for your enterprises, for your organizations? Today's theme, today's session is about that. Today, our objectives that I'm going to cover is to give you a broad overview of generative AI. Of course, ChatGPT and all needs no introduction, but this introduction is more to bring you up to speed on certain common terminologies that we use, look at the market potential, and look at the impact this will have on both economy and future of work. Next stage, you have these AI technologies that we'll discuss are really the catalyst of the change that we are seeing around us. We will be discussing about the current state of AI, but more importantly, looking at the evolving landscape and its impact from organizational capability development, how it can impact future of work. And in order to do so, I will be presenting a broad framework or a blueprint that can act as a guide to certain capabilities that you would like to consider for your organization. Finally, no technology comes without its inherent risk and challenges, and we will be talking about some of the considerations that you as leaders need to keep in mind while evolving, evaluating into with AI and changing the enterprise landscape. Towards the very end, we will be doing a Q&A. You can put your questions on the chat room, just type it out, and I will be taking up any of those questions, and hopefully all of them, if possible, time permits, from the chat. So with that said, let's get started. As I said, first thing is let's get the basics out of the way. For those who might have been living in the cave or is not very familiar with these technologies, I'm using this first slide to just give you a broad overview of what AI is. So, traditionally speaking, artificial intelligence is a software that can perform certain tasks, which ordinarily you would imagine human to do it with their own intelligence. Deep learning is one subset of what we call as machine learning. Machine learning is basically a subset of AI, which is a model which gains certain inherent capabilities to do what if analysis, to do predictive analytics, and is trained on machine data. Now, these machine learning algorithms can detect patterns. They can learn from previous historical data and can make predictions and recommendations. Now, let me give you an example to make this clear. This could be applied in weather forecasting, for example. This could also be applied in your server or the laptop. So, depending on the historic data of the hard disk failure in your laptop, and if it keeps monitoring your laptop and hard disk, what it can do is it knows there are some 20 conditions which have to create that perfect storm under which your hard disk will collapse. Now, in order to elevate from that, what we do is the AI keeps maintaining these log files, keeps collecting these logs, keeps analyzing thousands and thousands of bits of data. Just for your information, log file is like blink of an eye. You blink and there is another log file that gets generated. So machine learning language algorithms process all this information and look at conditions which created a previous hard disk failure. And if those conditions seems to be emerging, it can provide an alert. Now, this capability can be applied in fraud detection, threats detection. It could be applied in any kind of situations. And there are several use cases, including traffic management, terrorism control, and so on and so forth. But today we are mostly talking about HR and L&D, so I'll stick to that. So deep learning are really machine learning, where there are layers of connected neurons whose connections have a weighted parameters in which it can predict. For example, it could be images or text and look at affinity-based models, which can be then trained for both supervised and unsupervised training of those algorithms or in software using convolutional neural networks. I know it's a bit tricky to understand this. So let's assume that these are these various neurons which are trying to look at, if I'm speaking, what is the most likely word I'm going to speak next, based on a affinity model based on hundreds and hundreds of text data that it has been trained on at a very basic level. Foundation models are, can look at unstructured data, which is unlabeled. Unstructured data is anything which doesn't typically fit in your table or RDBMS or databases. It could be like things like images, it could be emails, it could be video capture of traffic signals or CCTV camera footages, etc. And then these models can generate, specific fine tuning of that or adapt to a different kind of task based on those inputs. Great examples are ChatGPT-4 itself, which is a foundation generative AI transformer model. And then you have Google Palm, DAL-E, Stable Diffusion. So there are multiple such examples. What generative AI does is it builds on this deep learning foundation models and with capabilities that previously AI did not have, which is the ability to generate content. And this is where non-generative sentiment analysis using a concept called as adversarial networks. Adversarial networks is, think of it like two equal power algorithms, one look generating it and the other one correcting it. So they work opposite each other, balancing out and basically correcting whatever is being generated by. So these are adversaries in some ways, and that's what it means. And then we have this foundation models around built around natural language parsing or large language models that can process massive amount of structured and unstructured data, understand the relationship between these words. They can simulate tasks like, they can extract knowledge and then summarize it for you. Models like GPT-4, Lambda, etc., example of large language models. And you might have heard of recently of prompt engineering, which is the instruction that you provide to this AI towards producing a desired outcome or output that you want. So with this, and I know I went a bit fast in the interest of time, I hope it gives you at least some meaning and context to some of the words that you will be using as you go along. So back to generative AI. All of us, I think, are equally stunned and excited with what has been happening in the last 12 months. But to be honest, I'm calling it a brave new world, but is it really new? AI has been in existence in about 3 to 4 decades. Some of the advancement and excitement I do remember happened around 1980s around AI when there were things like natural language parsing and many of these algorithms were there. There were investments being done at that point of time in AI, but it did not fulfill the promise it held at that point of time. And we can dwell on it a little later. But what we have seen in the last 12 months changes everything. What we have seen is a huge amount of interest across the world. Now, if you really look at ChatGPT itself in the last 12 months of release, and they have released a new LLM model based on ChatGPT, which was ChatGPT 3 earlier, and now it's ChatGPT 4. Similarly, you have other models coming up which can do huge amount of token processing, which is equivalent of words, um, which are being developed. In fact, recently Google announced their new LLM model called Palm 2, which will power its Bard chatbot, and it will be integrated in other Google products as well. Overall, not only excitement, but the investments have reached $12 billion in the first 5 months of 2023. Now, to give you an estimate, you must be wondering what those numbers are. So, within 5 days of ChatGPT launch, they had 1 million subscribers. As of today, in fact, as of July, they have more than 100 million users. And if you think about where they're going by the end, it's forecasted by 2027, they will have 1 billion users in their platform. Now, that's the opportunity and scale at which this is growing. Now, you think about, any other kind of tool, any other kind of consumer app. This is a world record for a consumer app adoption. Um, Nobody has been able to beat this kind of numbers ever before. The question, I think, in many of your minds might be, okay, AI is old. So why all this excitement in the last 12 months? What really changed? What really happened here? And the answer to that is several things. There is just not one thing that you can point out to this re-emergence of AI. But I have tried to put down some of my thoughts as to why we are seeing an emergence of artificial intelligence in general, as well as generative AIs. One is that compute power. Compute power has increased significantly over the years. Previously, what could not have been processed on a server is held in our palms nowadays. And specifically with this infrastructure available on cloud makes it accessible to a lot of users and lot of in many ways, I will say democratized large compute, which previously were in the domain of being in the labs and having fewer people just access it from the lab setups. The other thing is really about graphics processing unit. If you think about the amount of data this neural state, the token state, it's a concept of parallel processing. Now, parallel processing again is not new, but as I said before, it was in the confines of high-end data centers, and very few people could access this kind of parallel processing computational powers or graphical power, graphical processing. So when you think about natural language parsing, computer vision, imagery, and all of the things that we are seeing around you, synthetic video creation, all of that relied very, very heavily on these GPUs. And it is through these GPUs we are access to that which triggered the reemergence of AI. But that was just not it. You see, consumers, on the other hand, have been exposed to things like Alexa, Siri, um, Google, which have got voice interfaces. And as a result, there was increased awareness among the users about the potential of what they saw in their real lives about AI and how it can impact, how it can entertain, how it can change significantly based on the kind of things they were experiencing coming to them from these big companies. But the most profound impact in my mind of why it happened now was because there was significant amount of data lakes that were available. Now think about algorithm being there, compute being there, but what you really need is to train these models. And to train these models, you need to have big data. Okay, and big data, these data lakes, the vast amount of data that today we are generating, whether on social platforms, whether in organizations, whether in our customer interactions, each and everything is being captured. And it is this data that is really acting as a fuel to rocket this AI uh, launches that is happening and that you're seeing all around you. But even with that, I think there has been a role that companies like IBM, Google, and others have played. When you think about IBM Watson or Google, who created a lot of development and R&D spend in these technologies and made them open source. Without them doing this open source, without that cloud infrastructure, without that compute development, without that data lakes, none of what you are seeing today would have been possible. And finally, I think if you look at the amount of dollars being poured in terms of investment and funding in AI, also has been instrumental in creating startups and ecosystem which develop these technologies. And I think it's all of these combined that we are seeing what we are seeing in the last 12 months. So I think now it gives you a good idea of why and why now, basically. Is it the next frontier of tech evolution? I'm absolutely convinced it is. Um, while there may be still skeptics who may think that is it all hype or are we going to see some real evolution on the technology? I believe we are at the threshold of unleashing the full potential of AI. And in that sense, it is going to be the next frontier of tech evolution. So we should call this the age of generative transformer models. I talked about the fact that IBM and Google did a lot of work around this open source models that came out. Even if you look at Chat or BERT, which is for sentiment analysis, these were some of the early transformer models that came. And thanks to work done at IBM Watson and Google, many of these open source technologies, real like TensorFlow, etc., really became instrumental in development of AI and the pervasiveness that you see today of mushrooming AI companies that you see all around us today. Of course, ChatGPT again kind of changed, and then there has been several progress that we have made in the last few months. As I can see, that last 4 years or so, or 5 years, have been quite exciting for generative AI models. There have been both proprietary models that have come up, and there is still newer models come up. The most recent being the launch of Palm 2 by Google. So I expect now if you have seen the earlier models like Lambda or BERT, there are so many such models that are coming up. And based on these models, what we are seeing is the emergence of a variety of different degrees of AI software companies using this kind of transformer models and generative models to create solutions, independent solutions being served on cloud and SaaS, which are coming up overall. And this is the data from Bain Capital Ventures from the 2022 report. I'm also going to report based on, I'm also going to talk about this report based on the next productivity frontier. It's a study done by McKinsey and Company, which talks about the impact of generative AI. It has, let's say, on productivity, dollars in value of global economy. The latest research estimate that generative AI could add about 2.6 trillion to that 4.5, 4.4 trillion already. Now, if you have generative AI, which has the potential to automate a lot of task force, we believe that, as per the report, that 60% of knowledge workers' work that they do can be automated using generative AI models. Now, that pace of evolution of transformation will likely increase as we move forward, including potential for technical automation, things like automatic website generation, mobile apps, enterprise applications, SaaS solutions, which can be no-code environments, which could be a huge transformation in the software development environment as such. About 75% of this value that we are talking about from generative AI really fall under few use cases. And these use cases are around customer support, marketing and sales, learning and development, and HR in general, and software development. And then, yes, of course, research and development as well. So generative AI will have a impact across all these segments and industries. It will cut through all industry verticals, from retail to consumer packaged goods to financial services, and the potential impact of this could be up to 400 to 600 billion a year. Now, those are the findings of this particular report. So the economic potential is very high. But is that the reason you want to consider, um, you know, moving to AI for your organization because of the impact? Probably not. But then let's consider what is happening to your workforce as a result of all of this. What is happening is they are looking at ChatGPT, they're seeing the content being thrown at them from social media like Insta and Facebook and Google and YouTube and so on and so forth. So there is a huge behavioral shift that is happening in your workforce. People are looking for more just-in-time interventions like cinematic experience. They want to consume things on the go. There are more tuned to shorter formats of videos. We do know the potential of generative AI to disrupt certain categories, like assistant categories in the labor market, and secretarial staff can get impacted because of that. But what it can also do is it's also going to create several new roles. Um, in the non-IT domain or functional capability building, there is a huge opportunity to use generative AI as as a tool to create content authoring, for example. We had of late seen that in learning and development, the emergence of communities and social P2P sharing, which are changing the landscape in which L&D typically operated in. And that is again happening because of, again, I'm referring to a report by Frost and Sullivan about the emerging workforce or the future workforce. And you see from this that there's an increased trend in mobile and video consumption, the rise of these social communities I was talking about. Inherently, much of this transformation that you see is happening because of a multi-generational workforce. It is estimated by 2026, just 2.5 years from now, about 60% of the workforce globally will be comprising of Gen Zs and millennials. Organizations need to think about their L&D and transform using some of the technologies because of this multi-generational workforce and how they would like to learn, how would they like to develop their capabilities, competencies, skills, and so on and so forth. How these skills come together for what kind of work, etc., we'll discuss a little more. But this is one of the key drivers as well, particularly when you talk about the HR and L&D context. Now, I promised you that, we'll talk through where are we now, what's emerging, and what kind of a blueprint we can look at. So this is a slide I will be spending about 10-15 minutes talking through. So what we are seeing right now is really the first wave. This first wave are of, standalone generative AI. They're pretty much standing as independent solutions. What they are doing is basically they're understanding natural voices. Like the way I'm speaking right now is called natural language. And this natural language is being parsed by them. They can understand it and they can provide you an output. Today, because of this generative AI, we have seen self-authoring content being created. Uh, so for content creation, this is going to be a significant impact of that out here. Then we have images and video generation, synthetic images and videos. You have seen that with examples of DALL-E, etc., Midjourney, etc. A lot of synthetic imagery and videos are being created. We are seeing the emergence now of some of the standalone solutions being put in learning and development environment for providing, let's say, homework assistance. So I believe that there is this virtual assistance that is being increasingly going to be developed or is already there. And a lot of companies will be providing this standalone virtual assistant, virtual coaching, um, It is being largely going to be used for marketing and social content generation. Um, there will be a whole lot of personalization that you can do in the way you have framed your chatbots to other areas. So these standalone solutions will keep emerging, and you will have greater ability to interact with your customers, your employees in a different manner. You can personalize that more, but then independently, you can use several of these capabilities in different ways to enhance productivity, and that is where we are right now. And I said that some of these technologies today is being used by byteEDGE, for example, to create learning content, and I will show you some glimpse of that as well. Now, in the second wave, which is probably going to happen in 2, 3 years' time, is that these standalone systems that we see, which are trained on their model, we will pick up some of these technologies and start using with our data, with our system and knowledges. Now think about what it can do if you can have a chat GPT based on your organization knowledge repository, whether it's a product knowledge repository or it could be a internal system repository. So for example, the CEO might like to ask, okay, tell me what is the order forecast for next week? And AI should be able to tell that because it has now access to your order forecast and CRM access data. So where HR and L&D will come in is that many of the systems that they are using today, whether in terms of LMS systems, whether it's HRMS systems, they will become integrated with this chat GPT and generative AI models. Now, it is not only chat GPT or a chat bot, but what I'm talking about is really intelligent system, intelligent chat system being just one part of it. Think about these algorithms being embedded will be capable machine learning tools which can predict and do predictive analytics, which can tell you before an event is going to occur. It can do sentiment analysis. It can do um, nudging and notification. Now let's talk about this nudging and notification. This is one of my favorite really. We all know in L&D how much nudging and notifications and emails and WhatsApps, etc., that you have to do to learners to nudge them to come in either a session like this or in a training program or an e-learning course. Now, you are sending them emails, let's say, for example, or you are really nudging them to learn at a particular time. But what you may find is that AI can sense the data or and the learning activity of all your users, and then depending on the day of the week or the time in that day of the week when they previously learned could become a strong indicator when that nudging would be most effective for them. So, for example, if I am a person who likes to spend some time learning on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m., and in my social viewing, in my browsing data, in my all the organizational data or learning data, all of this data is collated. AI can detect that, perhaps the best time to nudge Kamal will be at you know 10:45 or 10:55 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That is when he's most likely to pick up this learning course or read a book or read that article or that knowledge repository. And imagine that you just created the nudge and let AI figure it out for thousands of users, which is the best time to nudge them. Now, this capability doesn't exist today. But with AI, there is a possibility that this kind of nudging could be done, which will have a far bigger impact from a learning adoption point of view than our reminders and human generated one time blast of nudges notification. Now, I was just giving you one small example. I don't have time in this call today to talk about everything that I'm listing out here. But I wanted to still use some of these use cases to give you an idea of what level of nudging can be done. Now, imagine that kind of nudging and then imagine what kind of hyper personalization can be done. from a user point of view, what is he browsing? What is he looking at? What are job roles he's looking at? What sites he's going to? What is he talking about in social media? All of that can be part of the skill recommendation engines, and can take all this data to recommend and hyper-personalize the learner to his experience, desires, ambitions, goals, etc. So there are a lot of use cases that will emerge from this. We already know companies like Workday, SAP, etc., who are trying to now integrate and create better use cases for HR and L&D, and so are we as byteEDGE trying to engage and get some of these technologies for our next level of products and versions. But where it goes from here um, is a third way, where which is probably around, I would say, give or take 6 years out, or 5 to 6 years out, at least in my mind, where we are talking about not only is this kind of generative AI embedded in your enterprise systems, but their enterprise systems are driven by AI. These are like self-learning, self-evolving neural networks and language models. So think about it like this. Self-learning means if you did a recommendation to me and I clicked on that recommendation, the AI understands that it has been success and then applies those formulas more for me. So there's this deep personalization that happens. It's self-learning and self-evolving in many ways. Let me give you an example of the kind of use cases that could come. And here, let's talk about skill taxonomy, for example. Now, in our world today, we talk about skill taxonomy in terms of competencies and in terms of skill sets from role-based skill sets and so on and so forth. And we are really hardwired to a certain extent biased in our way we look at, for example, a talent or a headcount which we are hiring for, and so on and so forth. So here is a bit of an interesting example for you to consider. How about AI generated micro skill taxonomy? You didn't hear of this earlier because nobody talks about it today. They will talk about it in a few years to come. Okay. Is there a word like this? I'm not sure, but this is something I wrote because I believe that this will eventually come. Now, what this means is, let's paint a landscape for you. There is a person in your organization who's today doing a function of accounts, right, in your organization. And as per your standard skill taxonomy, he has certain competencies and skills. Now let's evolve this and let's say that AI starts working on this candidate and his data and his history and his social connections and his Facebook and LinkedIn and organizational history, job history, whatever he has done, what kind of work he does, etc. What it can detect is that for your Ludhiana launch of your product, this person belongs to a family which is very deeply connected with some of the distributors, the most influential distributors in Ludhiana. And therefore, he has a micro skill of understanding deeply the Ludhiana or maybe say Punjab distributor networks. That's a micro skill. And he has deep connections as well. AI detects that. Now imagine for your launch, if he is the person who is doing that launch, it can be transformative for him. Whereas the person you have designated for it, who is your sales or branch manager, doesn't have any of those history, doesn't have any of those connections. Now think of the impact of this. Another impact could be there is the person, same guy in accounts, who could be on his side generating certain technologies or experimenting with certain AI-based algorithms on the side and posting it on GitHub. Your AI could detect that and put it under the skill taxonomy of this particular individual and say that, look, the reason he's very successful is that for his own order forecast using Power BI, he has been running some macros that he has developed on his own, which he has put it in GitHub. And by the way, our CIO was considering buying this for the CRM system, but it seems that we have an in-house employee who has been working on it. At the minimum, he can be a person who should be doing this vendor evaluation with the CIO team for the organization to benefit from. I mean, I can go on the whole day and give you examples of thousands of such examples. What will happen is that organizations will evolve tomorrow, whether it's gig workers or your permanent workers, to come up with short assignments based on projects, identify quickly who has the right skills, put them together, complete the task, and disassemble. So it's this assembly and disassembly of micro incubation centers, which are project related, which are self AI driven in the enterprises, could be the new world in another 6 to 8 years' time. Um, it can even do career path simulations. What if I learn this skill? What would be the impact of that in my career in the next 10 years? What kind of salaries will I get? Which industries can I work? Which locations can I work? It will be able to not only help you navigate, but simulate. We talk about talent mobility from a context of having a GPS to navigate organizational, mobility within the organization. But think about how about simulating those. As I said, the future of AI-driven enterprises is both exciting and to some extent maybe even terrifying. If you think about all the examples I was just giving you, think about the way it can transform the way you hire talent. Maybe you will do a kind of how you source your instructors, for example, or ILTs, for example. The kind of data that you can get about that instructor in terms of context, in terms of where is it performed, what has it done, etc., and really find that one instructor on LinkedIn which really matches and do this talent matching constantly, whether you're looking for sourcing a gig or for sourcing a talent. So, as I said, I don't have enough time to really go through all the use cases, but I think you're getting the idea of this now. Um, think about it from a marketing and the example I gave before. Everybody does newsletters and emails, broadcasts to thousands of customers, and the conversion rates of that is 2%. What if I could know how and when each reader, each person looks at their junk folder, for example, or looks at emails which are not important to them? Maybe for XYZ, it is at 3 p.m. on Thursdays. I could potentially program an AI for my newsletter, which could detect this for thousands of my customer base and send at 3 p.m. to XYZ so that there's the highest probability of him seeing that email. These kind of transformations can be huge impact to the business in terms of dollar impact, in terms of growth, etc. So the generative AI global impact as measured is that there is an AI impact which is around advanced analytics, machine learning, predictive analytics, which are the traditional AI, and those had an impact. But because of generative AI, the use cases that have driven, there is an impact of more than 40% on that, which means the economic impact, what was there, has been increased by 40% with generative AI use cases. And up to 70% basically. And if you look at it from a productivity and include all the use cases and all the productivity, then the impact is up to 70% of generative AI in unlocking the true potential of AI and the analytics that AI typically used to do and perform on big data. So what is happening is that generative AI is really taking the potential of AI and big data and building newer use cases and enhancing productivity at the same time to create a far larger impact that standalone AI systems or analytics were able to do. So the question really is, this blueprint is fine. Where we are going is looking great, exciting, inspiring even. What can you do now? What can you do into 2023 today? So some of the recommendations that we have, which you can use for igniting curiosity and drive learner adoption, transform that capability today, is to curate, and use AI to create synthetic but cinematic content. And this is what byteEDGE does inherently, but this is something that is not limited to just us. Anybody can do it to some extent. Maybe we can do it better than others because of the years that we have spent in building this kind of capabilities. But that's an area where you can definitely explore, particularly in areas like functional, domain specific, process centric. I mean, who reads a policy document anymore? Convert it to a synthetic video content, and you will see greater adoption. That's just one example of your knowledge repository moving from text to videos. Think of again your legacy content, could be even compliance content, which are still page turning slideware. Convert that to videos to get attractions. You will be able to personalize them for role functions and domain, even today using the technologies that exist. There are work being done around word technologies, which can be used as passive listening systems, um, which can do various kind of sentiment analysis. It can look at broader trend. It could be in broader trend while chatting. It could be while coaching, while virtual assistant, questions being out, your browser tending, browser, what are you doing in the browser. It's a great way of defining inside a thread, but more than that, it can help personalize some of the things that I talked about. Of course, there is this piece of talent mobility and AI-assisted adjacent competency frameworks, which can be developed even today with this, which can enhance the skill taxonomy and create baselines which will help you standardize on your job description, hire better talent, match the skills of high performance in this role, and use those skills to frame your JDs and use those as a baseline for recruitment of succession planning or talent, internal talent movement. Um, then there is a social sharing element of that can be enabled to a large extent using this AI generated content, which users can self-generate. So a whole lot of user generated content can become knowledge repositories. Um, there's an opportunity right now in L&D to replace the word gamification with instant gratification, recognition, and reward using this community. And I think those three are far bigger motivators than gamification. And finally, it's about having the role play simulations for workplace challenges. Those are the kind like virtual assistant, virtual coaching. Many of these simulations, role plays, those are clear and present opportunity for 23 and 24. Those are things that you need to evaluate. Those are things, capabilities that you can look at vendors, just partner with vendors who can supply these kind of technologies, which you can slowly start building as a part of your HR and L&D software stack or IT capabilities. To give an example of this, byteEDGE themselves, we have created this human avatar-based virtual experiences for the modern workforce. What we are doing is we are creating this cinematic video content. You can see some glimpse of it. These are like virtual studios. It's a conversational style instructional design. It has rich and immersive media being integrated into these videos. Of course, all of this cannot be done by AI today. AI can probably do a talking head, but you still need to immerse that with audio and visuals and instructions and design and conversational style. And then what AI can help you is to convert that video, keep it evergreen because you are using not actors but meta characters. They have a single tonal voice, which, yes, it doesn't have those variations, but it is very good for learning, um, specifically given the fact that you can keep it evergreen and you can create those content in the languages. And this is what I meant by personalization. This is the main one more example of personalization when you can reach out. For example, if you're an insurance company, think about reaching out to all your workforce frontline in their native language of the policies, product information, product knowledge, etc., and having them at their tip using this particular technology. So these are just some glimpses of things we are doing today with these technologies, which you can do on your own, or you can partner with certain organization which can give you what we being one of them. Now, but these are not without generative AI, and I think I just want to highlight that many of these capabilities and where we are going, leaders also need to consider the variety of risks and challenges that comes with use of generative AI or AI in general. Now, one of the things that can happen is around data bias or training bias. Let's say, for example, and it's a racial example, I'm just giving that as a bad example, is that while training data for a particular job role, you throw in a lot of uh, Caucasian white males, and it was their data, their use cases, etc. And while completing this, we threw in a few um, Hispanics and Black CVs as well in that data. Now, AI being overwhelmed with this data may interpret that for these kind of roles in the organization, a white male is more suited for this kind of roles. Now, that can be very, very discriminatory. It can create lawsuits that, like we have seen recently, Google paid $200 million in a lawsuit like that, where for internal succession planning, one employee found that it has been racially discriminated against. Now, this kind of discrimination, if you're using AI for hiring or for talent mobility or succession planning, because of the training bias, because the way we are training them or the data that we are using has bias, that is something we absolutely need to be uh, cautious of and ensure that the training, the developers who are working on such trainings, or the data that we are giving doesn't have inherent biases. Tough ask, but can be done with controlled monitoring and asking the right questions. There is, of course, while we are generating synthetic content, those content are being generated from somewhere, basically, from some intellectual property or protected property or protected information on protected knowledge or copyrighted data. So the other thing that to be cautioned is really around not infringing on data, copyrighted materials, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. The third is that when you're talking about this depersonalization, you're also collecting a lot of user data, basically, in order to personalize, in order to coach, in order to do sentiment analysis. We have to be cognizant that um, through the data, there is no way for identification of a particular user, and that we are maintaining the data privacy that is required for users. We have seen some bad examples of AI like TensorFlow, etc., being used for deepfakes and disinformation. We need to apply our critical thinking um, against these kind of misinformation that can happen. Um, then there is prompt injection that can happen. So let's say that I have designed a model on AI using transformers, which I have pre-trained, like ChatGPT, a pre-trained transformer model. But because of a kind of prompt injection in which you are prompting the AI to work in a way which is not as per the original intent of the design, to produce an outcome which could potentially be a security threat, or could be disinformation, or could be biased. So these are examples of these prompt injections. Um, One of the drawbacks of using this AI is that if somebody asks you, for example, that, hey, why did you select this candidate over other? And if you say, okay, AI recommended this to be the best fit, the fact is there is no explainability available for you if you are questioned on decision based on AI. Now, these questions can come from a regulatory point of view, from a governance point of view, from your stakeholders, etc. Something to be again very cautious of, something that you should know before making those decisions based on just AI data. And of course, there are risks associated in any regulated industry and also from the reliability and consistency. So we know that many of these generative models, the same input given, it can produce different inconsistent results sometimes, and some of them are not very reliable either based on the kind of data that is being fed. the rule of garbage in, garbage out still continues even with AI system. With that, I have come towards the end of this session. Thank you so much if you're attending and have heard the entire session. I hope you got what you came for. We will be, as byteEDGE, doing most of sessions. This will be transformed into a cinematic course in the byteEDGE platform. It will be available on YouTube as well, so you can check it out or recommend it to your friends and colleagues that you work with. And again, thank you so much and have a great day ahead. Bye.